Back when I first started building guitars, the process of gluing the binding onto the guitar body and trying to make sure that it was perfect was one that was filled with dread and stress and drama, and I just wasn't always confident that it was going to turn out good this time. That all changed when I discovered the 3 things that I'll be showing you in this video. Okay, so you know that moment when you put the glue on your binding and you're about to begin gluing it on the guitar. Things seem to be going okay. You've got dreams of flawless perfection floating in your mind. And then all of a sudden, there's a gap. It doesn't want to close, or maybe there's another problem or something else happens. Suddenly you realize that the glue's beginning to dry and you're freaking out. I don't know if you've been there, but I've been there before. Thankfully though, over the years, I've refined my binding process, and I discovered a few things that have really helped to transform the entire process from something that I was worried about to something that I look forward to, that's a lot of fun and produces really consistent, excellent quality results on every guitar. And I don't have to be worrying about if I can pull it off this time, you know? And so I was binding a guitar the other day, and my mind was kind of thinking back to those times when I used to freak out about it, and I was just feeling so glad that now it's kind of this meditative, enjoyable experience. And I thought, you know, maybe I should make a quick video and just take a couple that I think were important and transformative and kind of help to reduce that stress and improve the consistency of quality. And so that's what we're doing. So I've got this video for you today. I'm really excited to share with you these 3 tips to help you improve your binding process and hopefully enjoy it a little more too. Okay, tip number 1. I really like this one because it has other implications where you can carry over sort of this, the mindset that I'm going to tell you about, or the mindset that this tip requires. You can spread it out to other aspects of your guitar making. Anyway, so the tip is to perfectly fit your binding. I mean perfect, and purfling. They should be perfectly at rest when you put them into your binding channels. What a lot of people do is they will use something like a side bender like this, or maybe just a bending iron like this. They'll bend them, they'll maybe clamp them in the mold overnight or something like that to let them dry, and then the next day they're like, hey, we're ready to go ahead and put these on, and they start to try to you know, put the glue in and begin actually taping or roping on these bindings, depending on which method you like to use. And they're skipping a very important step, and that is to do a flawless fit so that the binding is totally at rest. The first thing I do is turn my bending iron on, and while that's heating up, I begin to really just kind of have myself slow down and relax and start doing sort of just a preliminary visual inspection to see how the binding is currently fitting on the guitar. Which places could be problems, which places are already perfect, and I just begin to take some mental notes and get a feel for what it's like. It's important to start with a little reference line so that you have a point to work from, and that'll give you a reference point that each time you come back from the bending iron to check your work, you can line up with that reference mark. Next, I take my white pencil and I begin making marks on the places that I'm identifying as places that either need more bend or less bend. And so once some of those marks are made, then I can take my first trip to the bending iron, make sure that it's hot, just needs to be hot enough to make steam. And then I can start making these micro adjustments. If I hit a spot that's really stubborn, that just doesn't want to go, then I'll just put a drop of distilled water and just kind of use it as a spot treatment and just sort of slowly and carefully work it. Don't think of this as a big bending process. We don't want to use a lot of water, and in most cases I actually avoid using any water unless it's necessary. But this is a quiet process, and I'm going to do quite a few trips between the guitar and the bending iron to make subtle adjustments and bring the binding back again and again to make sure that everything is fit. I think the key technique to properly finding the places that do need work, because it can be a little frustrating at first when you're trying to understand where the spots are that need help. But the thing I find works best is I put the piece of binding in and then I use my fingers to sort of rock the piece of wood back and forth. And by doing that, you can sort of identify the center, the fulcrum, is that the right word, that's causing this to teeter-totter back and forth. And once you identify that, you can mark it and then go work on it. And then once it's done being bent, you can bring it back and check to make sure that that spot is right. And when I'm placing the binding on and I check for that rocking motion or for open gaps or anything like that, and I can't find any, and the guitar binding is just sitting in there nice and comfortably, then I know that I'm ready to go ahead and begin the gluing process. So the interesting thing that I've found is that when you're in a hurry, and not really in a hurry, but when you're just feeling pressure, the pressure of life, the pressure of your profession to make guitars, to move forward and stay on schedule, it makes you feel like stopping to take this much time and slowing down to take this much time to do something like this. It might feel excruciating. It depends on your personality. At first it does anyway. But the thing to realize, the thing that I've discovered is you're gonna spend almost the same amount of time. So here's the way I look at it that makes me feel better. I can choose, would I like to spend an extra hour fitting these pieces of binding now so that the binding is fit and it's gonna be super easy when I glue it in, because there's nothing, I mean, the tape's not gonna be pushing and bending anything. It's literally just holding it in place. But do I want to spend the time to create that now, spend an hour on that? Is that enjoyable to me? Yes, actually it is enjoyable. Or do I want to spend an hour later on, extra time wrestling that binding into place, or even worse, trying to figure out how to hide binding gaps and flaws that occurred, you know? So it's like, it's just deciding which way that you want to spend your time. You know, and it's kind of a no-brainer when you look at it that way. So that's what I tell myself, and that kind of helps me slow down and get into this really fun state and really takes my work to a higher level. And this can be applied to any area of your guitar making if you stop and you look at it from that perspective. And the other thing about this too that I mentioned before, but I think I did, but anyway, maybe bears repeating, is that when there's not a lot of tension being forced during the gluing process, then our tension to hold the shape, I should say, like to hold a waist in or a cutaway in or something like that, then the chances of your binding remaining stable forever, or for, say, the next 100 years is the way I kind of think about it, are much better. And the chances of that binding never showing like lines through the finish or anything like that because it's moving around, it's just so much better. It's just so much more stable, and it just makes me feel better, and it's more enjoyable to put on. It gets me more consistent and better results, and I can just feel good knowing that it's going to be stable for many years to come. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, when I'm doing my binding, the first thing I do is I seal the entire guitar with shellac. I use shellac as my final finish on my guitars, but I also use it as the seal coats as well. And it does a great job. And there's a few benefits that are really important that have helped me a lot that come from doing this sealing process before I begin the binding work. Now, for me, I'm using a CA or super glue binding method. So I'm gluing the binding in with CA glue. And when you do that, it's really important to seal the binding channels as well before you put your super glue in. The reason for that is because that thin super glue can wick out into the wood, especially on the softer top woods, and it can actually destroy the guitar if that super glue would, you know, go out into that wood. It could leave a mark that you couldn't sand away. That's another reason why I like to seal the entire surface, especially on the top, because while I'm working with the super glue, I could accidentally have a little drip of glue or a run of glue that I wasn't expecting. It could go in the wrong place and it could actually ruin my guitar. So if you're using super glue, very, very important. Now, if you're using Titebond or some other water-based glue, then the sealing of the binding channels is something you do not want to do because the water-based glues need a wood-to-wood connection to get the most strength for the binding. So if you're using CA glue, seal the binding channels and purfling channels. If you're using water-based glue like Titebond, do not seal the binding channels. But in either case, I find that it really helps to seal all the surfaces on the outside of the guitar, no matter what kind of glue that I use. And there's a couple reasons why I find this so helpful. One reason is because when the shellac, in this case, is coating the fibers of the wood, I feel like it actually makes the wood, or gives the tape a better adhesion to the wood. And on top of that, and actually very importantly to me, it seems to strengthen the softer woods like the spruce just a little, so that when I'm removing the tape, there's less chance of me tearing out some of the grain. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but if you have, it's not fun. And no matter what you do, even if you do seal it, you got to be careful when you remove that tape. But it seems like it helps in that area. It helps the tape stick better, and it helps reduce the chance of me doing any damage to that soft wood fiber when I am removing the tape. The other thing I love about sealing the guitar at this point is, well, there's a couple things, I guess. It gives me a chance to see how beautiful it is. That's just for my enjoyment, to get a glimpse of how gorgeous the wood is going to be when that finish goes on, which is exciting and inspiring. But the thing that's important is that when that shellac goes on to the guitar, it's also going to give me, it's sort of like a preliminary test of what it's going to look like when I begin the finishing process. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but there's been times when I thought I had everything perfect and I went to start finishing my guitar and suddenly realized there was a little bit of glue somewhere, or maybe there was a sanding scratch that didn't get removed. And that's never fun to have a surprise like that right when you're about to start, or right after you've started your finishing process. So this is a preliminary sort of little glimpse to see if there were by chance any kind of deeper sanding scratches or glue in a place that I wasn't aware of. So it's just sort of a little precaution there, and that's just kind of a bonus in addition to the other benefits of sealing the guitar before you start the binding process. Tip number 3 is you have to have the right tape for your binding work, and there's 2 parts of this one: the right tape, and you have to have a great tape dispenser. Both of those are very important. Let me explain. So the type of tape you use is going to change, or what the right kind of tape is will change depending on the kind of glue that you use. That's the approach that I take. So if I'm using something like Titebond or hide glue or something of that nature, maybe fish glue some people use, I don't know, then one of these brown kind of binding tapes, brown paper tapes you can get from Luthier's Mercantile or Stu Mac or something like that, that tape works well for that. But if you're using super glue, then you really want to avoid a paper tape, because the super glue can wick into that tape and create a big mess. It can actually glue that tape to the guitar and just make a really hard to get off mess. So you don't want to use that. When you're using super glue or CA glue, the tape that I absolutely love, and actually this is the tape I use for any kind of glue if I'm using Titebond or super glue, I feel like it works even better than the brown paper tape, is just regular fiberglass strapping tape that you can find at Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever hardware store, or get online, of course, as well. And there's a couple reasons why I love this stuff so much. And I guess the biggest one starts with the fact that when you're using the CA glue, it just doesn't stick to it. So it's not going to wick it up into the tape when you, even if the CA glue spills around the tape or something like that, when you go to remove your tape, it's gonna come off cleanly. And that's probably the biggest thing, that's the most important thing. The second most important thing, well, it might be tied for being most important, is that this tape has a really good amount of adhesion. It's not too much that it's going to destroy the wood when you go to remove it. And it's got a good amount though that you can actually put some decent force on it, because even though my binding is fit and we spent all that time making it perfect, I still put a really good amount of force on that tape. And I put on an amount of tape that many people, including me, would agree is a little excessive. But there's something about just keeping the glue joint tightly shut that makes the super glue be able to wick and glue very well. The super glue is not good at filling gaps. So holding that joint together tightly, and you know, this could be my imagination, but I feel like having a lot of pressure on the binding area and taping it the way that I do. A lot of people use a rope to get this effect, to really squeeze that guitar. I don't know, it seems to subtly change the guitar and make it more responsive. I can't tell if that's my imagination, but I like the way this works, and the system has been really good for me. So the fiberglass filaments let you pull on that tape and it never breaks, which is amazing, because when I used to use the paper tape, a lot of times I would pull pretty hard on it and it would rip on the edge of the binding, and then I would slam my knuckles into the workbench. And by the time I was done, between the tape breaking and the fact that my binding wasn't fit perfectly back then, I really had a rough time of it and ended up with bloody knuckles and binding that wasn't as good as it could have been. So all that's different now, in part because of the things that I'm telling you in this video. So I'm hoping it's going to make a big change for you as well. One trick I want to show you with the fiberglass tape that really makes it even more my favorite is that you can take your spool of tape, or your new roll of tape, I should say, and you can actually use an X-Acto knife to go in, and you can load it into your tape dispenser, and you can just make a slice right in the center and begin peeling up one side or the other. And what that does is it creates a piece that's, for me, the perfect width to be used for binding, and it's wide enough that you can get a good grip on it and that it sticks really well, but it's thin enough that it can go into even the tightest curves, like inside of a cutaway or inside of a waist area or something like that. So not only does it resize the tape doing this little trick, but it also doubles the amount of usable strips of tape that you can get from one single roll. So that's a nice little bonus. And of course, the last piece of the tape, finding the right tape equation for success, I don't know if that even makes sense, is to make sure you have a good quality tape dispenser. I started out the way most people start out, which is where you try to guess how much tape you're gonna need, and then you pull out all the pieces and you stick them to the edge of your workbench. I don't know if you've ever done that, but that ends up being a mess, and it's just not a good way to do it. Having a nice dispenser is great. I finally at some point got this tape dispenser, which is very rough shape. As you can see, heavily used. It is okay, but not too long ago I got this, they call this a tape deck from Stu Mack, and man, this thing is so nice. I absolutely love it, and I think I might get a second one actually. It's good solid metal base, dangerously sharp blade on it. I'm just gonna warn you about that. I took the guide, or the guard, there's like a safety guard that it comes with. I removed it. I'm sure that's not recommended because you can cut yourself, so be careful if you do get it. But that sharp blade cuts through this strapping tape like nothing, and it's just been a joy to use. It's got a nice rubber bottom that grips to the workbench. Highly, highly recommended. I'll put links to these things in the description if you want to go check them out, and I'll link to a few other stuff too in case you're interested that I think might be helpful as well. So be sure to check that out when you're done watching. My hope is that those three things that I just showed you will help you improve your guitars and improve your time in the workshop. And that's really important because, you know, I think about this a lot actually. You know, it's important to enjoy your time. It's important to build your systems, your methodology, just your own mental approach, perspective, paradigm, framework, in a way that really does prioritize how you feel and how much you're enjoying each day as a professional guitar maker, if you're a professional, or even if you're doing this as a hobby. We chose this as a hobby or profession because it's our passion, because we love it. And if we're not enjoying it, and if it's bringing us stress, well, there's a lot of other jobs that pay much better that have that kind of stress and dread. So I don't know about you, but I want to enjoy it. I want to put in the work to keep this fresh, keep it being my creative expression and passion. I think it's worth it. And to be honest, when you do that, the quality of your work really takes a quantum leap as well, because your heart's fully in it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.